Hello, and welcome to the newest installment of the Server Technology PowerTips Live. My name is Ellie Byrne. I'm a marketing specialist at Legrand, and I'm joined here by our host, Bruce Auclair, who's our data center support engineer at Legrand. In today's live technical webinar, we'll be discussing TLS security certificates and installing certificate authority signed certificates on the PRO1 and PRO2 PDUs. Feel free to post any questions in the Q&A in the chat sections throughout the presentation, or wait for the end when we open it up for questions. If you have any other pressing issues, you can visit the servertechnology.com/support to get some technical support on that. And with that, I will pass the floor to Bruce to begin.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. This is Bruce Auclair. Been with Server Technology for quite some time, and as Ellie mentioned, we are going to discuss managing, installing TLS certificates on server technology, what we call Century 4, PRO1 and PRO2 PDUs. These are the PDUs that run version 8 firmware. Specifically, we're going to be going over an agenda that includes a brief amount of overview of TLS certificates. Then I'm going to follow that with a detailed listing of requirements for the certificate. I will, during the review of the certificate, I'm going to give you some reasons why you should consider installing a trusted certificate. Then I'm going to jump into doing a demo of installing a trusted identity certificate, both through the web GUI and through an SFTP client connection to the PDU. And then the presentation will conclude with a question and answers period. Okay, so what is a TLS certificate? I'm sure many of you are already familiar with what TLS is. It replaced what was more commonly always known as SSL. It is Transport Layer Security, which is a cryptographic protocol that provides end-to-end security for communication over the network. It protects the information through an encrypted channel that can only be decrypted by the intended recipient. Important to note is that the Century 4 PRO1 and PRO2 PDUs, they support only TLS 1.2. They did never support TLS 1.1. They did previously support SSL version 3 and TLS 1.0, but those were deprecated many years ago. And so why do we need certificates? Well, in a nutshell, it's the basis for secure web browsing. They ensure we are communicating with the trusted server that has been verified by a certificate authority. Okay, so this is an example at the top here. After logging into one of the PRO2 PDUs, taking a look at the certificate, specifically at the certificate hierarchy. This is, again, a PDU that has a trusted certificate already installed. At the bottom here, we see this is the certificate installed in the device, which in this case is the PDU. It was issued by this authority, GoDaddy Secure Certificate Authority G2. It is a wildcard certificate, which is why we see it presented in this format. And then at the top level, we see that GoDaddy is the prevailing root certificate authority. If you were to, in your browser, take a look at certificates, you would see that that GoDaddy is listed as a trusted authority at the root level, so the top level. So that's what you're going to see as a trusted authority once you've logged into a PDU with through a web browser to a PDU with a trusted certificate authority certificate installed. Okay. Oops. Sorry. So without a trusted server certificate installed, you're going to get error messages, and this is because the PDU has only a factory installed certificate that it's simply self-signed. It is not signed by a trusted certificate authority. So if this is a PDU that has not been configured or had a trusted certificate installed, this is typically going to be the error message you'll see upon connecting to the PDU. It is a certificate authority invalid. It does not recognize the self-signed certificate as a trusted certificate, and so it provides this complaint. I should note that I have already hit what was previously an advanced button that appeared in this space. That advanced button may or may not exist, depending upon policies of the organization. Many enterprise level organizations are already distributing machines with browsers and policies that will not allow you an advanced option to proceed to log into the PDU. In my case, I had that option. I clicked the advanced button and I ended up with an option to proceed. So right away, we have one good reason why you want to install a certificate, and that is because without it, you might not be able to get in. Okay, there's some other examples that you might see upon initially connecting. A good example is a certificate date invalid. I don't have a screen capture of that, but that is expected to come up more frequently in the not too distant future. This is due to the Google Chrome project announcing that it will be disallowing connections to web servers with a trusted identity certificate that is older than 90 days. Today it's just over 13 months at 397 days, but in the future it will be denying connections even with the trusted certificate installed if that certificate is older than 90 days. And another frequent one that you might see upon initially connecting is a common name invalid error. And we'll actually see that later when I get to the demonstration portion of this presentation. Okay. Another good reason is if you do have the option to proceed and you log into a PDU that is only contains a self-signed certificate, you are going to see what is an intentionally annoying nag message. Now, this nag message was added back in December of 2021 with the 8.0W firmware release, and that this was added because we know that many organizations have already deployed systems, computer systems, laptops with policies that disallow connections to web servers without a trusted identity certificate, and we expect these type policies to continue to become more popular and more widely accepted. So we know that eventually many computer systems simply will not be allowing you to connect to a web server that is not running a trusted identity certificate. So this nag message is intentional. It does go away if you navigate away from the page. It's just a one-time message each time you log in. If you go to a different page, it's gone. If you go back to the overview page, it's gone. You will also see that nag message when logging into the CLI, which would be through an SSH session or through a serial console session. Okay, I'm going to get here now. These are requirements and some additional information for what's needed to install a proper trusted identity certificate into a server technology PRO1 or PRO PDU. They must be running firmware version 8.0G or later. That is because that is the release that introduced TLS 1.2. We highly recommend the current release version 8.0Z, and this is in part because 8.0Z will be required for all PRO1 and PRO2s to be updated to future 8.1 releases. Now, this has never been a requirement in the past with server technology PDUs. That is, you've always been able to go from one version directly to the latest version, not needing to go through steps. But for the first time in the history of server tech PDUs, it will be required to go to 8.0Z before you'll be able to go to 8.1 releases. It will not after that be required. You won't need to do steps in the future, but to get from 8.0 to 8.1, 8.0Z will be required. So you might as well get it done and update to 8.0Z potentially before you consider installing your trusted identity certificate. Now the PDUs supports certificates in the PEM or DER formats. They require a CRT file, any name ending .crt, and a key file, any key file ending .key. The maximum certificate size is 8 kilobytes. The maximum key size is 4 kilobytes. The PKCS #1 RSA key sizes up to 4,096 bits are supported. We recommend a 2048-bit size due to speed trade-off. That is, a higher RSA key size does slow down the communication speed with the PDU, and your web pages will load slower. The signing algorithm supported is any of the SHA-2. SHA-256 is the highest, and that is what is recommended because it is required by most, if not all, modern browsers. And that's to meet minimum security requirements. We do support passphrase encryption, which is optional. If you do choose a passphrase when creating your certificate files, it can be 0 to 63 characters. We do support wildcard certificates, and we'll see that today. We do also support an optional intermediate CA certificate, but that is only with firmware versions 8.0T or later. Okay, now there's multiple steps in installing a server identity certificate, a trusted certificate. It involves enabling the option to install a certificate and then installing the certificate by uploading both the key file and the CRT file. With versions 8.0G through 8.0S, you are able to enable the options through the web GUI, through the CLI, which is a serial or console session or SSH, and through the API. For versions 8.0T and later, you can also enable the options by SFTP. Now that's just enabling the options to install a user-supplied certificate. Now actually installing the certificate files, that can only be done by the web GUI or by SFTP. The command line interface cannot be used, and the JSON API web service also cannot be used. So we're not going to discuss JAWS because it only allows you to enable the option, does not allow you to install the certificate. Once you've installed the files, they are not shown in the files list in the PDU, which is only visible to folk with administrator level privileges. They are hidden from that list for security. And then finally, the one thing to note is the PDUs, the PRO1 and PRO PDUs, do not have the ability to generate a certificate signing request. You must generate the request outside of the PDUs and then proceed to get the certificate signed from an outside authority. Okay, so let's you should have a fairly good understanding of why you'd want to install trusted certificates. So let's move on to the steps required to actually install them. Okay, just as an example, there's plenty of tools out there online, third-party tools that you can use to generate the required CRT and key files. This is one that I've used in the past. It has the option to use a passphrase or not, and this is what you would choose if using this tool, the PKCS1 RSA private key. And as mentioned, 20,048-bit is recommended, but we do also support 4,096-bit. Now, for those of you that may have Server Technology Pro 4X and quite possibly also Pro 3X PDUs, in addition to PRO1 and PRO2, if you happen to attend the presentation yesterday at this same time, we saw that it is possible to use a Pro 4X PDU, I think also a Pro 3X PDU, to generate the required certificate files. That presentation should be available within a week, but that could be used, and then they could be saved from that PDU to a local machine, and then you could go about getting them signed by whichever certificate authority you use. Your organization probably already has some tools for generating your own certificates and getting them signed. But keep in mind that there's plenty of different ways to do that. The PDU does not have the ability to do that, not the PRO1 or PRO2 PDUs. Okay, so I'm going to start by demonstrating how to install a certificate into a PDU. And I'm going to start by showing you what it looks like without or with a self-signed factory certificate installed. Okay, so this is, as seen earlier, this is a message that you'll receive. It's indicating the certificate authority is invalid, and that's because it's a self-signed certificate. I mentioned earlier that I get an advanced button. This may or may not appear for all users. I have to click that button. I've got the option to proceed. I'm going to log in at administrator level. Okay, as mentioned, here's our NAG message. And I'll show you that it goes away if you move somewhere else and then go back. It is gone at this point. We see not secure up here in the browser at the left. I'm going to press the F12 button. This is Chrome. That'll take you to the developer tools, and we'll actually see that there's two errors. The second one, certificate missing, is the certificate authority invalid. It considers it missing because it's missing a trusted certificate. And then the other error is that the subject alternative name is missing, more commonly known as a common name. Out of box, the common name with ServerTech Pro PDUs is ServerTech Pro PDU. And this does not match, in this case, the address that I used, which was the IP address for the PDU. So it's not finding a match for the subject alternative name and giving you 2 complaints at this point. All right, let's take a look at what is needed to install a trusted certificate. And that's going to be to go to the configuration option. Then network, and then the HTTPS page. As mentioned previously, it's multiple steps. Step number 1 is to enable the option that allows you to install your own trusted certificate, which is clicking the enable box. You need to then click apply. It will give you a message that restart is required. It is not actually required at this point. It will be required after we install the certificate files, the key file and the CRT file. So that was step number 1, to enable the option. You do have the option to enable the intermediate certificate. I don't have one of those, so I'm not going to be doing that today. And I did not create the certificate files that I will be installing using a passphrase, so I am not going to enter a passphrase. So at this point, I'm going to hit the upload button, which will take us to the configuration files page, where you see a list of the files in the operating system, the files list. You do not see the self-signed certificate file because, again, they are hidden for security reasons. We have two steps now. We need to install the key file, and then we need to install the CRT file. So I'm going to choose the Choose File button. If you're using a different browser, it might say browse ... instead of choose file. And I'm going to upload the key file first. That's successful. I will proceed to upload next the wildcard certificate. Okay, so that is successful. We continue to see a message indicating restart is required, so that's the final step. Go to the tools, to the restart page. Use the drop-down list and choose the standard restart option. And as we'll see, this is just a soft restart. Outlet states if it's a switched PDU or not affected. And now it's a matter of waiting for the restart to complete. Now, when it's back online and I attempt to log in, we should see it take me directly to the username and password prompt without complaint. Okay, there we go. Still not ready. And no. Well, okay. I went through this a number of times. I'm not seeing what I saw before. I must have done something wrong.
Hey, Bruce, this is Duncan.
Yes.
You didn't do anything wrong, but that's a great example of the common name invalid message. So because we're accessing the IP address, it's going to give us that error message until we access via a host name that matches the common name on the certificate.
Yes, thank you. I forgot that was a different message there. That was not the certificate authority invalid. That was, as Duncan mentioned, the subject alternative name not matching. And I was going to point that out after logging in. I just forgot that in this case, it does still give you that error. It's just a different error now. And that is because I have, again, just used the IP address, and it's the certificate that I installed is a wildcard certificate. So it's not, I'm not logging in through a host name that is registered with the DNS servers. But we've logged in. We can see that it still says not secure. And if we look at the developer tools, we're going to see that it is only, in this case, the name being invalid. So let me log out. And now I will log in through using the host name that will match with the wildcard certificate, which is this link. There we go. All right. So thank you for that, Duncan. At this point, we're logging in, and it's a wildcard certificate that's installed, which, if you recall from earlier, was start at servertech.com. So there is no complaint at this point. I'm going to log in. Oops. And now we have success. We no longer see not secure up here. We see a good, what I learned yesterday is called, I think, a tune button, but no errors from the browser. no errors upon initial connection. And if we again look at the developer tools, we will see the page is secure, it's valid. So we have success from the web interface. It's a relatively simple process. I'm now going to show you the other method for installing a certificate, and that is to use a SFTP client, which I will start. Let's just bring up a blank page. The SFTP client method, you need to use an SFTP client to connect to the PDU. Then you need to log in at administrator level, and you ultimately you need to put the key file and you need to put the CRT file. But in order to do that, you must first start by enabling the certificate option that allows you to install your own user supplied certificate. And the way that we achieve this is making use of what is known as the server technology INI configuration file format. And that is a very powerful function of the PDUs. And one of the options is to create an INI file simply called enable.ini. You can really name it whatever you want. In this case, I've created a file that has the options that allow you to enable the user certificate. Now, I can put this in the chat at the end of the presentation, but we're just looking at it quickly. I'm installing a server certificate. So yes. Oh, here we go. Yeah, just right here. It's black. Server certificate is enabled. I am not installing a intermediate certificate, so that's commented out. The certificate files were created without a passphrase, so that line is commented out. If you did desire to install an intermediate certificate, you can enable that option by removing the semicolons at the beginning of that line number 6. And if you have used a passphrase when the certificate was created, you would do the same. You would remove these two semicolons and then pay attention to the note here, because in order to not have that passphrase show up clearly in the file, we do provide a method to encrypt it with 128 character AES 256 hex string. So the first step is going to be use the SFTP client, connect to the PDU, log in at administrator level, and put the enable.ini file to the PDU. Second step is going to be to put the key file or the CRT. The order does not matter. You can do either one in either order. I'm going to do the key first myself and then the CRT file. And then the final step, because as we saw through the web GUI, a restart was required. The final step is going to be to put what I have called a restart.ini file, which simply uses the stick protocol to tell the PDU to restart. So let's do that. I'm going to do this with a different PDU at different address. Because it still has just a self-signed certificate installed. I'm using SSH right this moment just to show you that nag message that appears through the CLI, and so that I'm reminded to mention that the SFTP method only succeeds if the SSH server is enabled, which it is enabled by default. If you have disabled the SSH server in the PDU, then the SFTP option that I'm about to show you is not valid or will not succeed. Anyhow, I've logged in through SSH just to show you that that nag message on this PDU is still there. It is still running the self-signed factory certificate. Now I'll proceed to show you how to upload or put the files to the PDU by SFTP. And log in at admin level. I'm sending the enable.ini file, which on my system is in a folder off the root called Tech Talk. Now I'm going to do a put of the key file. Followed by a put of the wildcard certificate file. And we'll follow that with a put of the restart.ini file. I've quit the session. That PDU should momentarily be restarting. And when it's back online, we will log into it through the web browser using the wildcard or the host name. In which case, we should see no initial complaints, no warnings, no errors. And then post login, we should also see that the not secure that would be there otherwise is not there. We'll see a fully trusted certificate. Okay, that would be this one. So no complaints. And now upon login, the nag message is gone. And we have an all good symbol at the beginning of the URL field. Take a quick look at the developers tools and we see success again, only in this case, we installed the certificate, the trusted certificate identity file by the SFTP method. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Bruce.
This is contact information for if you have any questions, you can reach out to Server Technology on the right. Raritan is familiar with our products as well. And we'll pass it back to Ellie.
Awesome, thank you. So at this time, we'll be accepting questions. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm also allowing microphone accesses to everybody. So if you're feeling up to it, feel free to come off of mute and ask your question directly. We will give a couple moments for those to come in if there are any.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for that, let me just show you one additional thing that I didn't mention yet. And that is if you did run into issues where you believed you've done everything correctly, but then you cannot get connected using HTTPS, I have included in the presentation a way of getting it back to where the PDU is running the factory certificate, and that ultimately is to log in through SSH at administrator level, issue a command to disable the user certificate file or option, and then also remove that that certificate that you installed. There is no ability to remove the factory certificate. Simply removing the user supplied certificate and disabling the user supplied certificate option makes the PDU revert back to using the factory signed certificate.
Great. We did have one question come in from Donald asking which ports are being used for the file transfer. Are you able to address that, Bruce?
Well, yeah, that's the standard SFTP, which I'm just forgetting off the top of my head, but I've got the answer nearby. Hang on.
It'd be port 22 SSH.
Yeah, that's what I thought, and I'm pretty sure that is correct.
Okay, looks like we have another question here from Ray, stating just to confirm, using the wildcard certificate is in order to apply the certificate universally amongst more than one PDU, and also otherwise you would be using the serial number in place of the wildcard.
Well, you could create individuals not using a wildcard certificate, and what you choose as the subject alternative name is up to you during the certificate creation process. I know, for example, that if you use the PRO4X PDU to create certificates, it allows up to 10 subject alternative names or common names. And that could be if you have host names registered with your DNS servers, it could be the subject alternative name could be that host name. So you could do similar to what I did using a host name instead of an IP address. You could include the IP address as a subject alternative name as well, in which case you could point the browser just using HTTPS with the IP address. So it's up to you, but yeah, it is generally much more flexible to use wildcard certificates. You really don't need to keep track of which certificate gets installed. You don't have to have a different certificate for every PDU.
Thank you, Bruce. Are there any other questions from the audience? Feel free to ask them now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that's correct, Kamal. Port 22. Yep.
All right, it looks like those were all of our questions we got right now. And with that, we can conclude. So thank you all for joining. The recording of this session will be available on our PowerTips Live webpage, which is servertechnology.com/PowerTipsLive. That will be available in about a week. If you need to reach out to our technical support team, like Bruce has the information right up here, feel free to go to our servertechnology.com/support page or reach out through email at support@servertech.com. Thank you all.